Greetings internet, it's Monica, and today I am filming a recent reads video. These are the books that I have read during the end of July and most of August. There's a few days left still in August, but I figured I would still make this video because I felt like it, and I already have quite a few books to talk about, so we don't need this list getting any longer. These books are a combination of Booktubeathon books and then also just books that I read during the month of August. I'll start off with the Booktubeathon ones. I actually filmed an entire Booktubeathon vlog, but I ended up not putting it up. I don't know why. But I'll still talk about the books that I read. First book that I read was for the coin toss challenge, which was to pick your first book of Booktubeathon with a coin toss. And I ended up going with Artemis Fowl by Eowyn Colfer. This book was one of my faves when I was a kid. I loved Artemis Fowl and I loved his plotting and all of that. And the book is actually being adapted into a film, which I'm really excited for because I just loved this character growing up. So I wanted to sort of dive back into this world and rediscover it, and boy was it a rediscovery. I did not realize just how much I had completely forgotten about this story. All of it was new to me basically, which was wild. I thought I had retained more than I obviously had. But anyways, this follows Artemis Fowl, who is this kid genius. He comes from a notorious and very wealthy criminal family, but his family's wealth has taken a hit recently, so he is plotting to steal magic from the fairy world in order to restore his family back to their sort of glory days. And on top of that, he is dealing with some emotional things that you learn about as you're reading the book, especially when it comes to his family. This book it's basically imagine Tony Stark was a little kid, you know, that's kind of what this book reads like. He's this seemingly cold-hearted genius child, and he just is ready to take over the world. So the book is just really fun. The fairy world is interesting because it's much more bureaucratic and militant than what you would expect from hearing about a fairy world, but it still has that element of magic to it. I love the underlying narrative of this, of looking at how humanity is hurting the planet, and that sort of theme underlying everything I think is really important, and again, totally something that I completely forgot and did not remember was a thing or did not pick up on as a child. But yeah, this was a really fun read, and I am hoping to pick up some of the next ones, and just can't wait until the film comes out. I want a trailer. I can't wait until the trailer drops. I hope it's good. I really hope this isn't a bad movie. Then for the green on the cover challenge, I read the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I have currently lent out. This book though, this book was everything to me. It was I had heard the premise so many times, and I had heard people talk about how much they loved it so many times, but I just never really bought into it, you know? I just sort of thought it was overhyped or something. And so I picked it up, and oh my goodness, this book is not overhyped. It's so good. Basically, this story follows Evelyn Hugo, who is this old Hollywood actress, and you watch her sort of climb the Hollywood ladder from the very bottom to the very top. You see the 7 husbands that she goes through during this time period. It's so emotional, so the writing is beautiful, the characters are amazing, the representation is fantastic. In this book you have female-female romance, you have discussions around the emergence of bisexuality, which I thought was really interesting, the fact that at a certain point that wasn't even a concept that people were thinking about, and so the erasure of that and how that affects this world. And you see so much of how society stifled these people from being just who they are, and how suffocating that is. And yeah, it's a story about love and ambition, and it's just so good. It's so good, guys. If you are like me and you were like, it's definitely overhyped, it's not as good as people are saying, like, it is. It is so good. The next book that I read for Booktubeathon was Save the Date by Morgan Matson. This is my second Morgan Matson book, and this was for the challenge, like, read a book that is about something that you want to do in life. And for me, I've always had this secret dream of being a wedding planner. And this book is about a wedding. So this book takes place over the course of one weekend, and it follows Charlie. And Charlie's sister is getting married, and she is very excited about the fact that all of her siblings are coming home. They're all going to be under one roof for the first time in a really long time. She really loves her family, and basically everything that Charlie has sort of like idealized just seems to continually be going wrong. This story is so fun and funny. It had me laughing out loud at so many points. It has a lot of heart too. At its core, this book is about family first and foremost. Like, there are a couple of slight romantic moments throughout, but the whole like story itself and the like development is really focused on family, and I love that. At first, I will say, like, it kind of started off a little bit rocky for me. Like, at first I wasn't loving it, and I kind of worried that I was gonna end up DNFing it, but after a few chapters I was totally hooked into this like world and all the chaos of this wedding, and I loved it. I loved all the characters, I loved what the story ended up becoming, and I just thought it was really fun. So yeah, I highly recommend this one. I really need to read more Morgan Matson books because I've read 2 so far and I've loved both of them. The other one I've read is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour, and that one made me cry a lot. After that, I kind of veered away from my TBR and the challenges and ended up randomly picking up the Kiss Quotient. This is one that has been getting a lot of hype, and I feel like I should have read more reviews before picking it up because unfortunately I did not love this one. However, I say that with a stipulation. I still think you should read this book if this is a genre that you are into. Now for me, I kind of went into it thinking it was gonna be like, now looking at the cover, I don't know why I thought this. I thought it was gonna be more like, not literary fiction, but like just sort of more cutesy romance, or even just like more character-driven romance. And this was definitely more like steamy, sex-driven romance, which is fine. That's fine. If that's your thing, you'll love this. It's just like, for me, I want more character development. I wanted more nuance in the book. At the same time, though, the representation in this is amazing. The main character has autism spectrum disorder, which was previously known as Asperger's, and the author, its own voices for that. And then the main male love interest is Asian, and he's a sex worker, and he is never shamed. Like, sex work is never shamed in this book. Consent is super important in this book and always given. And those are things that I love. I am so happy that those are elements of this book. That's why I like couldn't give it a bad rating, even though like this book and I just didn't connect. I'm just not a huge like traditional romance kind of person. Like I just struggle to connect with those books sometimes. So that was basically, is sort of like more my fault than the book's fault. But if you are like really into romance, really into like steamy romance books, you might love this. Actually, I think you will love this because it's, for that, I think it is really good. It's just not my kind of book. So unfortunately, this one was a miss for me, but I don't think it's like bad. It's still recommended. Hopefully that makes sense. Now we're gonna get into some books that I don't know if I'd recommend as highly. Did I mention that this, I think, was actually my worst reading month of the entire year? And I have, I think, what is going to be my least favorite book of the entire year in this month. Like, it's gonna take a lot to disappoint me as much as one of these books did, but let's continue on. The next book I want to talk about is The Book of Essie, which I also have a physical copy of, but I'm not gonna play Jenga with my bookshelf again, so we'll just do a little thing right here. When I first started reading this, I was so into it. I was certain it was going to be a 5-star read. Basically, it follows Essie, who is a teenage girl, and she lives with her family, who are these very conservative Christian people, and they have a reality show. Her dad is a pastor, and yeah, you're probably familiar with this type of family if you like watch TLC or something. At the beginning of the story, it's revealed that Essie is pregnant, and her family and the TV show have to kind of figure out what to do about this mess. And I think it explores a lot of really important topics, especially when it comes to organized religion and the use of religion as a weapon or as a way to protect men and people in power, particularly men, particularly white men. And I love that. I loved Essie's character. I loved at the beginning of the story, the plot just like moves at a pace where you like can't put it down. Like I literally read this book in one day because I just couldn't put it down. I needed to know what happened next. However, at some point in the book, it just sort of meandered. I really appreciated a lot of the messages that she had in this book, but I kind of wish that she showed more and told less, the author. And then I wasn't 100% in love with the way that sexual assault was depicted in this book. Also, trigger warning for sexual assault in this story. It just sort of felt like it was being used for shock factor. At the same time, I really feel like the author was having, like, she had like a really good message about assault. Like she had a really good message with it. I just sort of feel like the actual use of assault, or the way that it was like sort of plotted out in the story, like I wish it was just done a little bit differently or handled a little bit better. It wasn't horrible by any means. I feel like I'm making this book sound so bad. And I would love this actually as like an adaptation. Like I think it would make a great like Netflix like film or something. I think it'd be really good. But I just sort of felt like the story itself, the plot sort of like had some meandering moments. Kind of wish it was a little bit more show than tell. And then lastly, the handling of sexual assault I thought was a little messy. Not horrible. Like I feel like reading it, I know that the author's heart was in the right place, and I think I just don't think it was handled perfectly. Like for example, when I used to watch Game of Thrones, like I very much so felt like sexual assault was used purely for shock, and was like, I just thought it was really gross and not actually saying anything. And like this book, unlike that, this book is not like that at all. Like it just sort of could have been better is what I'm saying. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. It's a difficult one to discuss. Also because I don't want to give anything away, but I also want to like prepare you for what the story is. So then I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This book. I thought I was gonna love this book because it's been touted, like people talk about like how messy and unlikable the main character is, and I love a unlikable woman as a main character. Love it. That's one of my favorite things. Like I love unlikable characters. However, this book, if you've ever watched the television show Girls, like that is what this book is. Like it just frustrated me because it was saying some really interesting things, but everything that it was doing just felt really thin because of like this place of privilege that it came from. Literally the best way that I've been able to describe it is that it is like watching an episode of Girls, where it's like, okay, we're exploring some interesting topics about like humans and like connection and relationships and like being a woman in New York City, but like why are there no people of color in New York City, and like why are there no poor people? I like googled it afterwards, and like Lena Dunham has blurbed it and has done like a bunch of promotion for the book itself, and I was like, that actually makes a lot of sense because that is what this book feels like. It feels like a Lena Dunham book, and I don't know how else better to describe it than that. So if you don't, if like that doesn't mean anything to you, I'm sorry. The writing was really nice and it was very easy to read. So at least there's that. I don't know. Oh, My Year of Rest and Relaxation is about this woman who lives in New York City. She's in her 20s and I think she has depression. She basically wants to sleep for a year. She doesn't want to die. She just wants the world to pause. So she like takes a lot of drugs and hibernates for a year. And that is the premise of the book, which I think is interesting. Like I think that idea of like wanting to like put life on pause and get away from everything. Like, I think that that is super compelling. And at first I was like, it's really interesting, like the time period that she set it in, because I think that like in a lot of ways the main character sort of represents like America in itself and like America's apathy at that time. And so I think that there is some interesting stuff happening in the book. I don't hate it wholly. I think it was fine. Then I read The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. This book has been getting a bunch of hype, and it was a bit of a disappointment for me, just like all these other books. Yeah, I was so excited to read this book because people have been talking about it, and it just sounded really interesting. It's about this girl who is in space, and she is all alone on this spaceship, and she's basically going to be all alone until she's like 40 because her parents died on the spaceship and all the other people on the spaceship died, and she's going to some new planet sent by Earth, and yeah, she's just alone. And then one day, Earth sends out another spaceship to meet up with her, and suddenly she's not alone, or won't be alone. And so over the course of the novel, the spaceship that the Earth sends out gets closer and closer to her, and their messages like start off being like months apart to like minutes apart, you know? So that was really interesting to me, and I think the pacing of the novel for the first 2/3 was brilliant. It was totally gripping, couldn't put it down. My issue with the story is that I just thought the ending was so predictable. Like, if you had told me the premise of the book and then like if you told me the first 2/3 of the book, I'd have been like, oh, the most obvious way to end it would have been X. And that's how I feel like it ended. For me, what like frustrated me was that I loved it. Like, the first 2/3 of it was like, we're so good and we're doing such interesting things. And then the ending didn't. And I was just really disappointed about that. But the first 2/3 I thought were really good, and I do think it'd be like a fun, quick read. I just didn't love the ending, and I'm a big stickler for good endings, so unfortunately it just wasn't for me. But a lot of people have really enjoyed it, so perhaps you will too. I don't know. Last book I'm gonna talk about is what I think will be my most disappointing book of the entire year. Yes, I'm calling it now. It will take a lot to defeat this. And it is Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. Oh boy! So this book was one of my most anticipated reads. It is a book that I have been wanting to read for ages and have been so excited for, because this is like a retelling of Scooby-Doo basically, or a spoof off of Scooby-Doo. It follows these adults who, when they were kids, had this like detective agency that they would do over the summer, and over the they would basically investigate mysteries in this small town that they would go to over the summer, and it would always be like a man in a monster suit or in a mask or something. And then their last case they end up solving, but it ends up just not feeling right. Like, all of them were left sort of emotionally scarred by the experience. And this follows them years later when they're adults, going back to that town to reinvestigate, open up that case and reinvestigate what actually happened. This book started off pretty okay. Like, I was really interested in the characters and what the author was going to be doing. Like, I love Scooby-Doo so much, so like I was sold on this. The cover is amazing. But if you're going into this book thinking that it's going to have even an ounce of the charm of Scooby-Doo, you would be sorely, sorely mistaken. But even without that, because I don't think it's fair to compare this book like to how well it does at like replicating Scooby-Doo. Like, that's not a fair review. I get that. So I'm not gonna review it like that, but just putting that out there. If you want Scooby-Doo, just watch some Scooby-Doo. This book, it's so frustrating because it starts off kind of interesting, but then the way that the characters switch is so jarring. Like, he'll change completely the way that the story is told, from like a script style to a regular narrative style. So outside of the fact that I really didn't like the writing, there's also a few elements in this book that I found kind of problematic, for lack of a better word. During the beginning of the book, a character, one of the like side characters or background characters really, is referred to with a slur for being intersex, basically. The depiction of the mentally ill I thought was like very frustrating, like using the mentally ill as a joke slash gag. Not super into. I think that there are a few different instances of transphobia in this, and I wasn't sure if I was just like reading into it wrong, but I had someone leave a comment on my review on Goodreads because I rated it poorly, and they commented that transphobia though, so I don't think it's just me who read it that way. The like villain is trans. It's like the whole discussion of that and the like jokes that are made about that, I just didn't find okay. And then randomly there are like Native American stereotypes throughout the book, and especially at the end. The plot itself just felt bad. Like it just sort of was all over the place. I feel like the story just like lacked direction or focus. I felt like it kept trying to end, and then like something else would happen, and I was just like, can it be over? Can I be done? And like at that point I just sort of wanted to finish it so I could talk about it. I think I just kept hoping that it would get better, because this was the book that I like was so anticipating and so excited for. So I am incredibly bummed that it didn't work out. Yeah, I didn't really have anything else to say outside of that. Yeah, this was a very disappointing reading month. I'm typically much better at like choosing books. First of all, like just deciding what I want to read in the first place. I'm usually pretty good at finding books that I'm going to like. Second of all, I usually DNF things if I'm not into it. But for all of the ones that I didn't like, I just like, they were all books that I was really excited for, so I didn't want to DNF them. I just kept reading them, and then they all just ended up being disappointments, so I don't even know. Lesson to myself to just DNF more. Alright, those were the books that I recently read. I would love to hear from you guys if you've read any of these, what you thought, or what books you've recently read that you've loved or hated, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Bye!